Welcome to
Naming It, where we discuss pop culture, current events, and how they relate to the way that we live our lives, all through the lens of two black psychologists.
Naming It is dedicated to acknowledging the elephant in the room, validating the lived experience of people of color. Coming to you from the Bay Area, California, we thank you for joining us.
I'm Dr. Bedford Palmer.
And I'm Dr. LaMisha Hill. Music on Naming It is provided by Lee England Jr., the soul violinist. Good morning, evening, afternoon.
Yeah.
Welcome to Naming It, y'all.
Welcome to Naming It, y'all.
We are back.
Yeah, it's been a while, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the second episode of this new season, but it's the last thing that we put out was like all the way back in July.
We went on a little hiatus, but we got back at it. Linked up in New Orleans.
Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah.
What was that? So you all already heard, we didn't do a lot of commentary on it, but you've already heard, hopefully, our live episode in New Orleans where we were at the National Council of Schools and Programs in Professional Psychology. And they had us come out and do a keynote, and we talked about disrupting psychology through social justice and through social media.
Yeah.
And we also did a plenary, which if you didn't know, because I didn't know what this was at first, a plenary is when you have a workshop or a meeting at a conference, right? And everyone has to attend. So it's not exactly a keynote, but it's kind of right below a keynote. So we have like a keynote and a plenary, and the plenary was an episode. So hopefully y'all enjoyed that episode. That was like real cool for us.
It was.
What did you think?
I thought we had a great time. It was really nice speaking to some other amazing psychologists, getting their perspectives on their identities, how they contribute to the work, and how they uplift, really, and inspire and take care of our next generation of young psychologists. So.
Yeah. So I figured we should like do a little quick kind of syllabus for the listeners. I don't know, like telling them what's going on actually with us. So we are trying to we're going to be doing some new stuff. We're trying to bring in some new formats in the ways that we do interviews, the way that we talk about stuff. You should probably be able to expect for Black History Month, we're going to be doing an episode every week. But as we go forward, you can think every 2 weeks or so we're going to have an episode that comes out, and we're looking to do a season that's going to go all the way up into the summer. Yeah. So we're putting it out there. You can hold us to it. We're going to make sure that the needs are met, because
you definitely put it out there. So now we got to follow through.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I'm about. Well, we had a lot of folks who were sending messages of like, what the hell is Naming It, where y'all at? You know what I'm saying?
I think they missed us. I didn't get what the hell. I got, we miss you.
No, I definitely got I think I literally got what the hell, where the hell are y'all at? I got gifts, like people like sending little cartoons of people waiting and stuff. Yeah, no, like, we got, there's different ways of saying, hey, hello, we still know you, and we appreciate that.
Yeah. So when you were down in New Orleans, to sort of like get into the episode for today and what we're going to talk about, when you were down in New Orleans, you connected with a couple really cool individuals, and one person that you sat down with was, goes by the name of Ashtin Berry. Yeah. And she is a hospitality activist.
Yeah, it was like, and we talk about this a little bit in the interview, but I was just, it was actually, I think it might have been right after one of our talks or right before. I wanted to get coffee. And I have this thing about, I don't like just regular coffee. I need craft coffee. Y'all. And like, New Orleans is a spot for like craft coffee, y'all. Like, you can't go like 2 blocks without finding like a good coffee shop. So I went down the street just let you don't have to talk smack. Everybody knows I like coffee, okay? So we were going down. I went down the street to a quick coffee shop. I wanted to get some coffee, and there was a sister in there, and I was like, she was like the only sister in there. And I was like, I wonder if she'd be interested in the podcast, because I'm all podcast minded at that time, right? So I just like kind of handed her a card and showed her like, hey, this is our podcast. And then I think she looked us up, and then she was like, hey, do you want to, are you going to be here? You want to come to this activist event, to this community event? And, we weren't going to be there long enough for that. But then talking to her, I found out that she was doing what she's doing as a hospitality activist. And I was like, this seems like a person that namers would want to hear about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And while I was about to get on, sharing with our listeners about Bedford's priorities for coffee early in the morning, even while traveling.
Number one.
Something very, very awesome came out of it. Something very awesome came out of it. So I cannot.
Something very awesome always comes out of it. Good coffee. I don't know why you hating. I don't know why you hating.
Y'all, I'm like, so can I tell the story from my perspective about Bedford and your coffee?
If you want the whole thing. I mean, go ahead.
I'm gonna tell it from my perspective. So listeners, so neighbors, we're down in New Orleans on business. We're on business, so I'm trying to be on time.
Wait, naming it ain't business?
But we were there on official business. So let me tell it from my perspective.
Okay.
Let me tell it from my perspective.
Go ahead.
So we're down there on business, and I'm trying to be on time. I'm sitting up there.
Was I late?
Can you let me tell it from my perspective?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Please stop interrupting.
Drag me all you want.
I'm not dragging.
You are. Okay.
Oh, let me just tell it.
Okay,
let me tell it.
Fine.
So I'm there. I'm in the building. Everything's getting set up. Here comes the kickoff session. It's the first session. We're supposed to be giving the keynote, and I'm looking around like, okay, I'm sitting in the front row. Like, it's like, church on Sunday in the first pew. I'm sitting up there and I'm thinking, well, where's Bedford at? And then I'm texting. And then I'm looking. Then I'm texting. Okay, well, the welcome is going on. And Bedford is in the building. He is there. However, he had to get his coffee. And this was 2 days in a row of LaMisha being anxious. And the next day we were supposed to meet up, right? We were going to connect right before the session, before the plenary, before the live episode. And even in that, Bedford, I'm like, where are you at? He's like, oh, I'm going to go get coffee. And I'm thinking in my mind, I should have known better. In my mind, I'm thinking, oh, you're just downstairs getting coffee. No, Bedford's like, probably near the French Quarter, exploring the city of New Orleans, getting the best coffee in the world. It's like, LaMisha, no, not just yet. LaMisha, would you like to join me? And I'm thinking, oh, you're just downstairs. This man is like 3 blocks away.
No,
yes, you were.
See, look at you now.
And then
okay,
it's like,
now
then we got like 15 minutes. I'm trying to be on time.
And
you're over here exploring the cities of New Orleans.
Because you're not saying the truth.
Getting your lovely coffee.
Don't listen to her.
And he didn't even offer to bring me none back.
You're not saying the truth.
Maybe I'm a little mad that she didn't even offer. You're like, yeah, just come meet me. I got my heels on. It's kind of drizzly out.
I need some space, because you are not like giving factual information. You're putting out fake news right now.
I disagree. My perspective.
No, because your perspective versus what actually physically happened. So
that's my experience.
we've had whole conversations about
on time, and
so that was your experience. But like, your experience does not track to what I actually did. So let me tell you what actually happened. Okay. So first of all, you're mixing days. Because the day that I was talking about going, I was like asking if you wanted to go get coffee.
That was the second day.
That was the second day. So you said that the keynote, that didn't have nothing to do with the keynote. The keynote, I had coffee, the nasty coffee from downstairs. Okay? So like, let's keep that real. And that was that. There was no chance of me getting coffee because it was raining and the rain was going sideways. So while you expanding this stuff to multiple days and everything, no, it was the second day. Now let's talk about what we're talking about in terms of. So first of all, the first day is completely invalidated. Second day, we're going. We're setting up. Now you're not bringing up the fact that I was up late setting up all the sound and doing all the equipment so that we could get all that done in 1 hour, right? So when we walked in, the equipment just worked because it was magic. Because apparently, the elves came and did that, right?
I know you did it.
So I was up late doing that. So maybe I needed a little coffee in the morning. Because you went to bed. You got your rest and stuff. So then in the morning, what I did is I texted you and I said, "Hey, I'm going to go get coffee. Would you like to come?" That's what I said.
I don't recall that part.
Oh, I got receipts.
Oh, we can both pull the receipts. I recall it was like, thing. Do you have time to meet up? What are you doing? Yada yada yada. You know, we're 30 minutes out.
Okay, so let's yes, we are 30 out. We're 30 minutes out, and the place is called. We were at the you doing this. So we were at the Intercontinental Hotel. Hold on, we were at the Intercontinental Hotel in New Orleans. All right. Now, any of you can go on to Google Maps. There's the place that I was going to get coffee is Cafe Bon Ami. Mm-hmm. All right. That is a block and a half. You can see the sign from the front of the hotel. All right? So I don't know how long it takes you to walk a block and a half, but it does not take me very long to walk a block and a half. So I sat down there. Since you wanted to, like, drag everybody, I sat down there because LaMisha was like, oh, I'm ready. We'll come. And I was like, okay. And so I sat down there for 10 minutes waiting for LaMisha to come.
That's not true.
And then I started to realize if I wait for LaMisha, I'm not going to get my coffee. She don't care about my coffee. She worried about some other stuff.
That is true. Yeah, I do not care about your coffee needs.
So I was not prioritizing after wasting 10 minutes, you didn't have. After wasting 10 minutes, I went down and got my own damn coffee, and I also ended up meeting a nice person to have an interview with. So it was all kismet. Then I came back and we ran the thing. So what's the problem? You mad at my coffee when you need to be worried about your own stuff, man?
I'm taking care of my own stuff. We just have different priorities. We're different. We're two different people.
Did everything happen the way it was supposed to happen?
Everything happened wonderfully.
So why are you trying to drag me over some coffee?
I'm not dragging you.
You know what? It would have not happened right. If I wouldn't have had coffee, I would have been grumpy. I would have been sluggish. I would have had all kinds of problems. So there you go.
Yeah.
So I
don't know if the coffee helps.
Now you're gonna talk about my body now? You know my internal workings and stuff?
I didn't say that. Dang. I said the grumpy.
Can I?
The mood. Does the coffee help?
I am not. What, are you saying I'm grumpy?
You said that if you didn't have coffee, I would have been grumpy.
Yes, that's actually like that's what coffee withdrawal. It makes you drunk. It makes you grumpy. Like,
did you have coffee today?
No, I'm a little grumpy. Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. See?
Point.
Can we move on?
Point well made.
Because I was just trying to introduce. I thought we were just going to introduce Ashtin, and now you trying to drag me for my coffee, and I only drink 1 cup a day. I mean, dang. Oh man.
I'm sorry to get you worked up.
A black man trying to live in the world and get some coffee. I'm not allowed to have good coffee. I understand.
If you ever want to know what gift to get Bedford. Really good coffee.
Yeah, as long as you know what really good coffee is. Because if you think Starbucks is good coffee, don't send me no Starbucks, yo. Anyway, can we move forward,
please?
Let's move
forward.
Thank you.
Let's move on forward.
All right, so
do you have any shout-ins?
Shout-ins. Yeah, I want to do a quick shout-in for... I'm just going to shout in the 2nd annual 44 Days of Blackness at St. Mary's College, California. The work that the committee's been putting in, we're doing it again. We have another big slew of events, and we have a keynote. Bree Newsom is coming.
Oh, Bree's coming.
Yeah, Bree's coming. You know her like that?
No, but that's just so exciting. That's so exciting. Am I gonna get an invite this year? No, last
Everybody
year.
got an invite. Go on the website.
But am I going to get a personal invitation?
You're invited to come. Would you like to come?
I will check my calendar.
Wow.
And try to prioritize it.
Wow.
It's a distance, though, Bedford.
It's not. It's close to your house and your work.
It is. That is true. About? That is true.
See,
but then getting here from the BART, that's a different story. It's not straight off the...
See how she do me, y'all? See how she do me?
But I'm excited.
I'm going to help you with that.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited that Bree's coming to be with your community. That's really great.
Yeah, we're really excited to have her. So I think that's an exciting thing that's coming up.
Cool.
What about you? What's your
shout-ins? I'm just gonna give a shout in to the namers who have been reaching out to us in between our absence, requesting our presence. So thank y'all for extending that love.
Yeah, we appreciate
and your patience.
Yeah, and if you're listening to this, so if you're listening to this, then you've already done this. But go tell your friends to make sure to keep subscribed to Naming It, because the way the podcast apps work, there was a bunch of time in between. So if folks were listening, they might not still be getting our stuff kind of popping on their phone because we took too long in between. So we will make a commitment to do better. And we just hope that, you can translate to all the folks who may not have gotten this episode that this came out, and that hopefully it's a nice episode that you want other people to listen to.
Yep, absolutely. Right. Cool. So, are you going to play the jams?
Oh,
I think it's that time.
Okay, yeah. So go ahead, y'all do that.
What's going on?
Hey, we know.
What's going on?
You just clip that and use that for the rest of the time you guys do the segment.
There's a lot of things going on.
Yeah, there's so much stuff that, okay, so I think a lot of people want us to go back to like July and hit every single point. That ain't gonna happen.
July?
Yeah, because
I'm like, what happened?
We didn't one of your homies like send us a message on the Naming It website, and was just like, they just listed like a gang of stuff. Like, I want you to talk about this. I want you to talk about this. Y'all need to hurry up and come back and talk about this. And it was like, I don't think we're gonna be able to do all that.
We can't do all that. But we can talk about what's going on right now.
Yeah.
And I think, most recently there's been a lot of movement in the political arena for campaigning for 2020.
Yes.
And
can I just say, like Issa Rae?
Go ahead.
I'm for everybody who's black.
You rooting for everybody black?
I'm rooting for everybody's black. Yeah. I'm just putting it out there.
Just rooting.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I don't know if we can. I don't think I have as much political knowledge to be able to talk about all the candidates. But when I did look at them, I was like, who are all these people? So that was just.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of folks out there.
But one face that we do know for sure is Kamala Harris.
Yes, our senator from the state of California.
Yes.
Great state of California.
She put out her presidential bid. Had a great interview on CNN with I think it was Jake Tapper. First town hall.
Okay, yeah. Yes, but she announced at Howard at her alma mater, and she came and did a big rally in Oakland, which, I don't know, were you able to go?
No, I didn't even know about it.
How you not know about it?
I didn't know about it.
How you not know about it?
I really didn't know about it.
The whole city knew about it.
How did the whole city? LaMisha didn't know about it.
I need you to.
I need to stay connected a little bit better.
I knew about it.
How did you know about it? Like, where?
Because everybody told me about it. We were in New Orleans when it was. Because I was like, what? Man, I wanted to be. If it wasn't for the fact that I needed some self. We were doing me and my partner. We were doing some self-care stuff and like spending some time together. I would have, if it would have just been business, I would have came back for that. But yeah, so she did this huge rally in Oakland, and it was huge, and her speech was amazing.
Yeah. She also has a book out. I think it's called The Truths We Hold. Pretty sure.
Okay.
I got it on audio.
Oh, maybe I'll check. I'd like to check it out. What I really like to check out is if Senator and candidate Harris would like to come on Naming It. We'd love to like talk in depth about your book and like about everything.
Okay, so I wasn't going to bring this in since you were talking about your work stuff. I can go ahead and talk a little bit about my work stuff too. So every year for the organization that I am a part of, it's a staff organization called the Black Caucus. It was founded in 1968 after the assassination of MLK, and Black workers at UCSF really got together to try to advocate for a lot of change because they were experiencing some pretty disparate working conditions. Things like, working in, a lot of the Black folks, worked in a lot of service capacities, whether that was custodial or in the food service industry as well on site in the hospital. And, essentially, if they were serving food in the cafeteria or in the dining rooms, they weren't allowed to eat their lunch there. They had to eat in the basement. Yeah. If they were cleaning the hospital rooms on the highest floor of the hospital building, we got 12, 13, 14 stories, and they needed to use the restroom, they had to go to the basement.
Wow.
They didn't get paid regularly. They didn't get the same access to leave time, and other things about just feeling like they had agency in their in their work and in their day. They didn't have those things. So they went on strike to really advocate for change in 1968. So every year, and for a lot of years coming, there is an annual large-scale, evening event. It's a gala event, and we try to find a keynote speaker. So last year, the keynote was London Breed.
Yeah.
Came through, and that was really exciting. It was a big old surprise. Came through at the last minute. Really, really grateful. And this year, even last year, for a couple of years now, we've been trying to get in touch with Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
And it just has not worked. And I felt like this year we were so close.
Yeah.
But not quite.
No. Yeah,
but that's okay. We have a great keynote. We have a great keynote lined up.
Yeah.
I might talk about that later.
Okay.
I don't want to spoil it.
Yeah.
No spoiler alert.
Okay.
But in terms of Kamala.
Yeah. Well, it's like you got to catch people before they hit that meteoric rise.
Oh, man.
Yeah,
but we tried. This is 2 years in the making.
Yeah. It's, well, I'm not going to mention the fact that, like, Freud will just, like, bite you in the butt every time, because now I see why you did the whole invite thing, because last year we talked about how you didn't invite me to see London Breed, and you didn't invite me to the gala, and you never invite me to the galas, and then we talked about it and all that other stuff, and then we came to, and you tried to flip it on me about the 44 days. And see, now what I can do is I can flip it back, because I've invited you. So what's up?
Okay, Bedford.
Yeah, you have the invite.
Bedford and +1. I will extend an invitation.
Oh.
I can't guarantee.
See, don't even. Nah, I'm good. I don't want your pity invite.
No.
I don't want your like. I'm gonna tell you on the radio right now, and then as soon as we turn it off, you ain't gonna see. Look, y'all ain't gonna see me at this gala.
Understand? It's a.
Just stop. Just please stop. There's no.
It's expensive.
Oof. So. What the hell? There's so much implied there. You know what?
It's not.
I'm good. I don't want to go to gala. I'll go and I'll have my own. I will plan my own gala. Thank you very much.
All right. So I don't know all of the details for Kamala's presidential campaign and what her platform is she's running on and all those things, but I just know that she put it out there and she's getting a lot of interesting feedback. And I think this gets into the conversation about, I think a lot of people had a lot of strong reactions about Hillary not winning. And what was that about? Was that about gender? Was that about race? Was it what was there, in the post-Obama kind of section? Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting. I think we've talked about this, but the way that white women are portrayed in politics, and that being very different from how Black women are perceived in politics. And I'm framing it that way because I think I wonder about some of those intersections around identity. When we have, I think most recently in our recent memory, these very two kind of polar opposites between Trump and Obama, and the ways in which other political individuals fit into, this spectrum.
Well, I mean, I think it's the same stuff that women of color and Black women have to deal with all the time, right? It's the intersection of sexism and racism, and so you get hit with multiple things. Hillary Clinton got hit with sexism, hardcore, all day. But I noticed when Kamala Harris came out, it was immediate. It was just like a nasty outcry that, like, people actually wailed at the idea of her being out there in a way that, people have been making really, actually, reasonable claims about her record in terms of being a prosecutor. And, if you listen to Naming, you know how we feel about police violence and about corruption, and we're not about it. Here's the thing, though. If you're talking about any of these politicians who are running for president, they all got dirt. You know what I'm saying? And there's a specific kind of vitriol that comes out, particularly for Black people and particularly for women, and then way specifically for Black women. And I saw stuff like, there's a comedian, I'm not going to name him, I don't feel like, I'm not trying to, subtweet this guy, but he did this really this yelly, angry thing about like her record and talking about check that out and all this other stuff. I ain't never seen this dude do anything about Trump. I ain't never seen him talk about McCaskill or I don't know. Like he hasn't talked about the conservative folks. He hasn't talked about other people. But when this biracial black woman goes and puts her name out there, suddenly he has something to say. And I noticed that with a lot of people. They just have all this stuff to say. And I'm like, yo, like, yeah, there's some stuff. But if you read deeper into her record, one, as a senator, she's the most progressive senator. She has the most progressive voting record right now. And then two, there's actually some stuff to what she was doing as a prosecutor that if you look past some of the other things, or I don't know, if you there's a scale, there's something that's happening there. It's not all of it was great, but she was into diversion programs, and like if you don't know what a diversion program is, it's where you instead of sending someone to jail, you send them to a court that's for the issue that they're dealing with. So whether it's drugs or whether it's mental health court or whatever, it's a way to kind of keep people out of the system. She was doing stuff to reduce recidivism. So I mean, yeah, she was a prosecutor. She did things that prosecutors do, but she was also a prosecutor who did things that prosecutors don't always advocate for. So, I mean, you got to make your own decisions about that, but the way that people came up against her was just ugly in a way that the only thing that makes sense to me when things don't make sense is what we said. If you're messing with a woman and it doesn't make sense why you're being so mean, it's probably because of sexism. If you're messing with a black person, it doesn't make sense why you hate them so much. It's because racism.
Right.
That's my thought.
Yeah, so we'll see how it progresses and how it shapes up. And other people have already commented about essentially the ways in which political parties can dilute their reach in terms of their audience and the voters that they're trying to target, because there's too many kind of hats in the ring essentially, and a lot of things get split and different perspectives. But we'll see how things kind of move and how they progress. Because, I mean, and maybe it's just me, but I know half them people.
Well, this is one thing. If I could just say this one last thing about it. For folks out there, I'm just going to ask you to do this. Look at when you start thinking about who you're supporting and how you're supporting them, and you give criticisms and whatnot, pay attention to your criticism. Pay attention to what you're actually saying, and then match that to what other people are actually saying. You gotta validate your opinions in some way against the company you're keeping who have that opinion, right? So if you start saying stuff and Fox News people are saying the same thing, then you might want to wonder about, one, your source, and two, like the company you're keeping. There's reasonable ways to critique people, and then there's stuff that's like unreasonable, and then there's fake news stuff. And all of that, we have to be cognizant of that in every single way that we go out there and start talking about this, because the truth is that Russia is messing with our election. There's news out about China taking on like the same kind of stuff. And then you got like conservatives, and you got like neoliberals, you got all these other people who have all kinds of axes to grind. I mean, there was just recently NBC executive tried to blame Kamala Harris, like actually tried to like say that, well, Kamala Harris said that this governor who we found out is a racist in Virginia.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so right. So she apparently, when he won, she said positive things about him around race and stuff. And now they're trying to say, oh, because she said positive stuff about him, there's something wrong with her. But we didn't know about this yearbook nonsense until yesterday.
Right.
So it's like, wait, so this is got to be so magical that she has to go in the past and understand someone's full past before she ever says anything, and be more investigative than the news.
Right.
So anyway, I'm just like, be careful whose company you're sitting in when you say stuff, because sometimes you might be sounding like somebody you don't want to sound like.
Yeah. All right.
So we're going to try this new format.
Yeah. So let's dig into the real talk. On this episode of Real Talk, Bedford sits down with Ashtin Berry in New Orleans.
Yes.
So Ashtin Berry identifies as a hospitality activist. In Bedford, you got a chance to sit down with her and hear her describe some of the work that she's trying to do to raise awareness in the industry, but also bring in some of those perspectives around social justice and diversity and inclusion.
Yeah. So you want to hear some of that interview?
Yeah. Why don't we start playing it?
Okay. Hey, this is Bedford, and we're going to do a really kind of cool Real Talk episode, a Real Talk interview. I'm out here in New Orleans. You all know we just did this live show, and I was just going out to get coffee, and I ran into an activist, and we just kind of started talking, and I thought y'all should hear about some of the work that she's doing in the area. And so I'm going to do like we normally do, and I'll introduce you to Ashtin Berry and let her tell you about herself.
Hi, I'm Ashtin Berry, originally from Chicago, Illinois. I now live in New Orleans. I am a food and beverage activist. I work in the hospitality industry as a beverage consultant and an operational consultant. I basically help restaurants open or reimagine the work that they do. And I also do a lot of activist work within the hospitality sector. I focus on conversations about intersectionality, implicit bias, how communication patterns affect spaces, inclusivity, and safety.
That's really cool stuff, and I definitely resonate with it because it's a lot of the similar work that I do in my everyday job as a diversity and inclusion kind of expert in higher education.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't actually know that. I didn't have a consciousness of hospitality workers having kind of a specific activist arm, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so when she started going and started talking about kind of what she was doing, it was really, really interesting. You want to hear some of that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. So the way that we do Real Talk is that we basically ask about how your work intersects with social justice and how your life intersects with social justice. So could you tell us a little bit more about like the work that you do and just like kind of like how you live and what you're doing?
Yeah, so the hospitality industry is one of the fastest growing industries. It has never stopped growing, as a matter of fact, and it also has some of the largest, fastest growing adjacent industry, meaning farming and beverage industries. There are about 13 million people who work in the hospitality industry at this point. That includes hotels, restaurants, and bars. While it may not seem as this is an area that needs a tons of social justice, it actually is, because the hospitality industry is one of the few last industries where you don't need credentials in order to be a part of it, meaning people can start at entry level and then climb into leadership and other positions. It's also one of the few industries where people can make or attempt to make a basic living wage from tips. And that definitely depends on what type of sector you're working in. I want to say that corporate chains versus fast food chains versus full dining service restaurants are all a little bit different. I'll operate a little bit differently. I got into the business. I've been in the business pretty much since I was 16 years old. The work that I do is really focused on helping marginalized identities, whether it be people of color, women, immigrants, whoever it may be, kind of gain access to those leadership positions, and also educate people in leadership on why they need to be more inclusive of people who are entering in from these positions. If you don't know, women and women of color specifically make up most of the people in entry-level positions within the hospitality industry. The second group is going to be people of color in general. And that even expands when we start talking about the farming industry in terms of entry-level, and then expands when we start talking about fast food and other kind of chains.
Yeah, so, I mean, there was a lot of insights there that I had never thought about, like this idea that the food industry is a space where you can kind of work your way up, and it's one of the only places you can do that. Because, I mean, you can't do that. I mean, it's almost impossible to get a job now, probably outside of hospitality, without having some sort of degree. I mean, outside of like doing kind of like delivery work or factory work or some other kinds of services. So, I mean, there's probably other industries that are kind of adjacent. But when you think about and you listen to some of the narratives of people who are successful, a lot of them talk about working their way up from, you know, working tables to being chefs or sous chefs or whatever. Like,
yeah.
You know?
And the thing that she mentioned that I would have never known is she talked about farming as an adjacent industry to hospitality.
Yeah.
I would have never paired those things together.
Right. Yeah. So it's I can see like a line of social justice that goes with this idea of, you know, if you don't have any resources and you need to start making money, and this is a route, you know, this is a route to being able to kind of take care of yourself. But I wonder, like, what are some of the barriers, right? Like, what are some of the things that get in the way of that? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why do I do this work? I do this work really not by choice, but because it's kind of a necessity. I am one of the few women of color who has climbed and been women and certainly the only person of color that was representing in front of the house. For those of you who do not know restaurant lingo, front of the house includes bartenders, servers, management, and such else. It's basically people that the guests interact with. Mm-hmm. I have a background as a sommelier and a bartender. I've managed multiple bars, and I was always the only woman of color. And then when I started taking on management positions, again, I would generally be the only person of color and deaf or the only woman. So this work came out of necessity because if I want to see a change in terms of the space and who are my peers, it requires me to do this work in order to make sure more people get opportunities and that them getting the opportunity isn't negated by people's implicit biases, which is a huge thing in our industry.
Right.
So Ashtin just mentioned implicit bias, and implicit bias or unconscious bias, those terms can be interchangeable, is essentially, you know, defined as thoughts or attitudes and behaviors that really mirror social stereotypes and that kind of come up automatically without folks' awareness, and it can really impact the ways in which they interact with people, the ways in which they are thinking or not thinking about folks in different spaces. And depending on, you know, how it shows up, it could show up in a simple way of how we treat people differently. You know, she's talking about hospitality industry, so how someone might be received or greeted or not greeted based on how you assume that somebody looks based on how they walk into a door. Right. Are they a guest? Are they, you know, there to drop something off? Or
I mean, like, I'm wondering, like, kind of, like, what is a host supposed to look like? Mm-hmm. You know, can everybody type and every skin color and every gender be a host or hostess? Or what does it mean to be a bartender? Do you have to have a specific look or come from a specific background? Or, you know, like, I remember when I was a teenager, I worked at McDonald's. Mm-hmm. And at the McDonald's I was at, the black people and the white people and the Asian people would be at the front doing register stuff, and all the Latin people were in the back cooking. Mm-hmm. You know, and there wasn't a lot of overlap. You know, so we were like, there was a racialization of like who was supposed to be where, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I think that might be.
That's exactly, yeah. I think what that Ashtin's really getting at, and.
Yeah. So you ready to hear some more?
Oh, absolutely. It's really, really interesting.
So you've already kind of talked about how you work with marginalized groups and like you're doing this work out there. Particularly, like, how do you see your work and its connection to pushing forward social justice?
I mean, I think specifically it's about education. It's about making sure that workers are educated about what their rights are. There's a lot of myths and a lot of mystification because a lot of these spaces, unless you work for McDonald's or Starbucks, a lot of these spaces do not have HR companies. So it's not clear what your rights are as a worker. So it's really from educating the workers on what their rights, but also educating more business owners about how do they inherently create safer spaces, even in terms of what they allow and don't allow from guest interactions. Because one of the other issues is that you have a third party in the hospitality industry because some of the abuse is actually exacted by guests.
Right. Okay. So while you're doing all this, I mean, there's always the question of, okay, you're doing work. Why would you go to the trouble and the pain and the expense and the risk of taking on a cause of trying to advocate for people? Why not just kind of do your own thing?
I guess, one, I don't see it like that. Two, I think that's a very scarcity style of thinking of something. I don't think of helping other people as taking away from me. And I think when we make things oppositional as why would you not do this? Why would you do this because of this? We make ourselves oppositional to things. So I think it's about reframing yourself and to think about how do you leverage space for yourself, and leveraging space for yourself requires leveraging space for others so that you expand the network and expand the amount of people and support network you have. So that's the way I look at it.
Okay. So, I mean, you hit on a bunch of different areas. There's a lot of debate right now about labor and about, like, you know, minimum wage and about tipping and, like, what, you know, who's supposed to take on the cost, right, of someone else's work. At this point, I think, like, for me, I think, you know, we haven't fixed the problem around, like, getting wages together, so folks have to tip, folks have to, like, take care of folks. But could you talk a little bit more about...
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the issues right now is that people actually don't understand where tipping came from. So for those who don't know, tipping actually is a product of 1865 labor laws that came out after people were newly freed as slaves, and they wanted to restrict the accumulation of wealth that Black people could obtain. So one of the ways that they did this, and one of the areas that Black people went into who didn't go into other jobs like sharecropping and things, was the domestic work and hospitality work. These were the two places that they were really able to be hired in, unless you had a skill like blacksmith or something else that you had learned prior. So one of the ways that they were able to restrict their accumulation of wealth and also restrict their ability, obviously, to move throughout the world was through tipping. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge that. Because when we understand where it comes from, we understand why it can still be disempowering. With that said, I think that until we start to classify the different branches of hospitality, trying to do a unanimous what works for wages will never work in this country. Because the fact of the matter is, McDonald's doesn't run like your mom and pop bodega in New York, which is also considered a food service place, which doesn't run like your hotel, who has a bar and a full restaurant, which doesn't run like your white tablecloth place. I have worked in hospitality, like I said, since I was 16 years old, and I make more probably than the average person. That's the reality of it. Since I have been 18 and basically been serving, I averaged a shift $200 to $500. Right? But I am a rarity. I worked at fine dining places. I worked at higher institutions. That's not the truth of the matter for someone who works at Applebee's. Specifically a server. And so until we start to make branches of hospitality where we state this is different work than this is, we're going to continue to have this problem.
Wow. So there's so much to get into. I just want to start with a piece around tipping and tipping culture, coming from a way to further marginalize and restrict the upward mobility and the ability to generate wealth for newly freed slaves.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the whole idea of someone having optional pay is that's such a ridiculous idea on face that we accept all the time, right? And I think that one of the things that people may or may not be willing to admit is that we're all complacent, especially until you learn. Like, I mean, at this point, yo, I tip every single time. Like, it's like 20% period. Like, but I think a lot of folks come up with this idea that the tipping is connected to how satisfied you are with service. Mm-hmm. And that could be really problematic for people.
Right. Absolutely. And going to think about tipping in that sort of like 1900s time and era, right? For someone to be subjected to feeling as though all of their worth is tied to someone acknowledging that they are there and that they are present and that mm-hmm. they've done a good job, when we know the level of racism and hatred was just obscene. Mm-hmm. So it's hard, I think, knowing, when you say, you always tip very well, I try to think of myself as a strong tipper as well, and just not having that full spectrum of thought that mm-hmm. historically it was optional for people to grant gratuity, right? It was a gift in that way.
Well, I mean, I think it still is.
It still is, but I think that people feel perhaps there's more of a shared either understanding or connectedness to the culture of tipping now. But what I think, I'm just kind of like, my brain is doing this like weird explosion, like aha, epiphany, is just around hearing Ashtin really talk about the legacy of subjecting people to either nothing or less than based on your whims.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it makes a whole lot of sense, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a way to discriminate without it. It's a very easy way to make discrimination hard to see, mm-hmm. And I think that we see that all the time still. It's in the way that they redlined, mm-hmm. It's in the way that loans are meted out in different interest rates. It's the way that, like, you get an extra tax for going to any place where you have to barter, like a jewelry store, or to buy a car, or buy a house, or all these different things where if there's ever any kind of ambiguity, it can skew really negatively for people who are oppressed and really positively for people who aren't, mm-hmm. right? And so I think that understanding that and understanding its the reality of that kind of hopefully will give people pause in how they engage in that. Mm-hmm. So
Bedford, what else did y'all talk about when you were together?
All right, let's listen to that. So while you're doing this work, you have your own job, right? Mm-hmm. And now what we all know is that being an organizer, being an activist, that becomes its own job by itself. Mm-hmm. How do you take care of yourself and keep yourself well while you're trying to take care of others and take care of the community?
I think a lot of it is about having a support network. 2, setting boundaries. I think one of the places that a lot of activists actually aren't good at is setting boundaries. Once you start helping people with one thing, they try to push you to help with everything. Mm-hmm. It's kind of their want. And it's really good to have boundaries, and it's really good to stick to those boundaries because they will help you mentally have space, and they will also help you to know when to say no. Right. Or that's not me. It's not our job. We aren't heroes. We aren't saviors. So it's really important. I think the other thing is therapy. Like, going to therapy is helpful. Having someone who can objectively, who is out of the space you can speak to, not just your friends, about the struggles, because unless your friends do this work, even if they do this work, it's really difficult for them to understand the navigation. The industry I'm in, there aren't a lot of crossbreed activists like me. There are people, of course, who are activists and help hospitality workers, mm-hmm. but a lot of those people don't work in hospitality industry, right? So it's a very different conversation and angle they're coming from. Right. I actually still do service. Mm-hmm. So there's not a lot of people who are within that space. And so I definitely think therapy is important. I think taking breaks is important and not apologizing for taking those breaks. There are some times where I just say, I can't come to that. I can't do that. I need a rest. And I think taking breaks is really important. I need to be better at eating more healthy and working out. Those are definitely places that have trailed off since I travel so much for work and for activism. Mm-hmm. But I definitely think having boundaries and a support network are really important.
All right. So, I think, I love all the pieces you just said right there. As a psychologist, this all fits, right? So being able to set good boundaries, being able to say no. I mean, saying no is hard sometimes, especially when you know people need you, right? And being able to kind of see those things that you need to work on, being able to set SMART goals and all that piece. And of course, getting therapy, in our community. Like getting past that stigma can be a really hard thing to do.
It is a hard thing to do. Finding the right therapist is definitely a journey. I think specifically when we're talking about people who are of color, there's already so many stigmas related to going to therapy. And then the idea that you have to then work through and wade through to find the right connection can seem really daunting. But I kind of think of it like, would you talk to the first realtor you met to buy a house? Chances are you wouldn't. Chances are you'd speak to a few realtors, you'd get some recommendations from other people. And I think if people took that approach to getting therapy, maybe they would feel a little bit more comfortable. I also just think it's about finding what type of therapy is for you. Sometimes maybe it's not a traditional one-on-one therapist. Maybe it's group therapy.
Right.
And that could be something that makes you feel better, I think, or it could be community therapy, or it could, there isn't one style of therapy, and just keeping yourself open to that, and also transparent, right? What are your expectations from a therapist?
Yeah. So being able to communicate, being open.
Yeah, I think a lot of people struggle with communicating what their needs are because they haven't done the step back and the processing to figure out what their needs actually are. And if you don't know, that's fine too, but then you need to say that to a therapist. I don't know what my needs are, so I need someone to help me work through the process. And maybe they help you work through the process and you figure out, oh, this isn't the right therapist for me. And you can ask them to make a recommendation for someone else.
That's true.
You can say, hey, you took me through this process. I'm now realizing I think I need something different. I really appreciated working with you thus far. And I think any therapist would be happy to do that, to know that you are still trying to continue your care.
Absolutely. So we always like to close out with one last question, and it goes along with our mission, which is calling out the elephant in the room. So for you, in what you do and in life, what do you think is something, what is that elephant in the room that like sits there, it's invisible, but everyone is having to deal with, like, from your perspective?
Oh, in the hospitality industry, there's too many elephants. The room is full of elephants. The fact of the matter is that the elephant in the room in the hospitality industry is that it was built off of disempowering people, right? So you have when the whole industry is built off of that, it's really difficult to say that any of it works in a way that is healthy, because it's not. From the back of the house, it's militaristic, right? Which already has really unhealthy hierarchies. And then when you place race and gender within something that already has a toxic structure, it only compounds that. And so what I would say, the biggest elephant in the room right now, though, in the hospitality industry is the performance, right? People performing allyship, performing that they are doing well for their community when that's not actually true. And I think that's being reinforced by the powers that be, or the organizations that, rather than doing their research, are allowing people to use identities as credentials. Which is really dangerous.
Yeah, say that again, please. Please say that again.
I think the most dangerous thing in the hospitality industry, and I'm sure this goes outside of it, is how the powers that be and the people who are sitting in structures, rather than doing their research, are allowing people to use identities as credentials. And I am an activist. I can definitely make recommendations for how people doing things, but I would never proclaim, even though I'm an advocate for people getting mental health, I would never proclaim to know what the right way to do that is.
Right.
I have done trauma care, but that's not my job full time, so I would never proclaim to be an expert in that. And the hospitality industry has a very, very bad habit of allowing people, whether it be because they're Black or they're women, everything like that. Just because somebody's a woman doesn't make them a feminist.
Right.
Just because somebody is Black doesn't mean that they're interested in leveraging power for everybody in their community. Well, so letting people use identities from as credentials is extremely dangerous.
Yes.
And we've seen that play out multiple times in our industry. And I think that's the biggest thing. For all of the psychologists listening, I'm currently working on trying to get a mental health fund started for the hospitality industry. But I would also like to say that if the one biggest thing that I struggle with when I'm trying to get people to go into therapy is that hours generally don't work well for people in the hospitality industry.
Okay.
So psychologists who are willing to just expand their hours or have one day a week where they could have a different set of hours for people who don't have traditional jobs, could really do wonders.
Okay.
Because there's a whole market of people who could probably afford to have therapy, but it's just such a struggle for their schedule.
Well, so what's that schedule like? Give us some times.
So having slightly later hours is one thing. Having hours on Sundays and Mondays.
Okay.
And definitely having afternoon hours on Sundays is one way you can really help out that hospitality industry. A lot of people work brunch, and so being able after brunch to be like, oh, cool, I can go to brunch, I can have a therapy session, and if someone's on a double, even being like, I can work early brunch, I've got 4 hours in between, and then I can work a thing, that really allows them kind of a little bit more flexibility. But having just slightly later hours, I know that could be a little bit much, but even if it was one day a week where you're like, I offer a 7 o'clock appointment, could do wonders for a lot of people.
Okay. So, to the fellow psychologists who are listening, y'all heard it right there. Like, I don't have to tell you, that's a consumer telling you what needs to happen. So, I also, our primary demographic is, the people who listen to us the most are, women of color. And so I'm wondering, since you had a message for the psychologists, you got a message for the sisters too.
Oh, yes. For all of the women of color out there, stand in your power. Stand in your power, trust your intuition. That is that ancestral gift, and just stand in it. But also know that we as women of color, whether we are Black, whether we are Afro-Latina, no matter what we are, Mexican, we have to be better at sponsoring each other in conversations. We have to be better at leveraging space for each other, whether it be in our physical movements or whether it be in our conversations. I think that that's the biggest thing. The way that we see men network, the way that we see white men network, is the way we have to be better at networking with each other.
Okay. All right. So thank you so much for taking some time with us.
Thank you.
Can you tell us how we might find you online, or how we should follow you, or all that?
Yeah, absolutely. My biggest platform is on Instagram, even though I only have 4,000 followers. And my name is @TheCollect, RESS. So The Collectress. And I have a website that will be fully up at the end of February. But follow me on Instagram. I do a weekly reading where I kind of talk about themes larger in society, and I explain to everybody how they work in the hospitality industry.
All right. Thank you so much. And you have at least 4,001 right now followers, okay? So we'll see.
So that was a great interview. Towards the end, Ashtin's really getting into a lot of things around wellness, self-care, the importance of psychology, and then we got the mic drop.
Yeah. What's the mic drop?
I felt like the piece about, identity doesn't make you an expert.
Oh, yeah.
Nor an advocate.
No. I mean, I think that speaks to so many spaces, right? And I really like the piece about, because she talked about people doing the research and doing the work, right? So one of the things that I think we've tried to do with the podcast is when we don't know, when we're not the expert, we want to bring that person in. We want them to talk about what's going on. So we're not experts in hospitality activism. We didn't even know about the existence of it prior to talking to Ashtin. But getting to hear her voice, I'm hoping that some folks can kind of awaken to the reality of an industry that we all use all the time.
Right. Absolutely. And really understand the legacy of tipping culture and the ways in which threads around elitism, around oppression come into every time you get that receipt and put that pen to the paper.
Right.
Really think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and regardless of what people think about the service or what's going on, understanding that tipping is a social justice activity. Mm-hmm. You cannot underpay people for their work. If you have a problem with somebody, go complain, have a conversation with them, don't come back, put a Yelp review, I don't know. But that person who brought the food out, put it in front of you, or that person who did whatever they do that has a normalized tip, they brought the food to your house, whatever, you owe them their wage. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, the food would be more expensive and you would pay it that way. So pay people, tip people, pay attention to this. When you hear about McDonald's workers striking or you hear about hotel industry workers striking, don't just worry about whether you get your Big Mac or whether you're able to get your stay on time. Mm-hmm. Understand these are real people's lives and real people are trying to do real things so that they can continue want to live and be happy, but also continue to do all these things that we need done. Because the hospitality, you can't do hospitality without hosting other people. And, mm-hmm. and if you're engaging in it and you're not working in it, then you're the one being hosted.
Absolutely. So be sure to follow Ashtin on Instagram. She goes by The Collectress. And we'll put out some information about her, some of the articles that she's been featured in our newsletter. So you can check that out by going on the website, namingitpodcast.com. Right. And so scroll on down and sign up for the newsletter that we put out every episode.
Yeah, and big shout out to all the hospitality workers out there, especially right now, specifically in New Orleans, because we were out there and there was a lot of hospitality in New Orleans.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and a lot of good food, a lot of everything. So, all right, so is that it? Are we done for the day?
Absolutely, but as always, go ahead and follow us on all of our social media sites. Please share the podcast with your peeps and go ahead and give us a review and some stars.
Yeah, we had a review in a while.
Well, we ain't been doing no work in a while, so.
Listen to other stuff and doing it. But anyway, thank you.
Have a wonderful Black History Month. We'll come back at you with some more awesome episodes, and we just want y'all to keep naming it.
All right, peace.